So, we've got some friends up here, and I'm going to be moderating, which I don't usually, you're the moderator, I get to sit on panels, so this is kind of fun. So what we're going to do is invite these folks to answer specific questions, and if we don't know that we're going to have time at the end. You're going to have to come talk to them later. I don't think we'll be able to do texting and questions, but we'll start with the ones we've got. So I've got Wendy here, who is our executive director. I'll let her say a little bit more about herself. She is currently residing in the two-stoplight town of St. Stephen, New Brunswick, which I had the pleasure of visiting this summer. Also didn't fly here today, but flew here recently to be here for our Generous Space retreat, which is starting tomorrow. Whew, there's a lot going on this week. So that's Wendy. She's here as an ally voice, and next to her is Kathy Kwan. Welcome, Kathy. Kathy's local. She's part of our Generous Space Community here, and I'm going to let her say a little more about herself. Next to her is Casper Zuzek. Welcome, Casper. A favorite on our panels. We've had him on a lot of panels because he just keeps saying really good stuff. So he's also local here to Vancouver, and he'll talk more about himself. And then you already met Sarah. She's going to be our other ally on the panel. I did not get the memo. I wore my blue, but y'all look good, so we'll just cut the video off there. That'll be good. Casper and Kathy, we want you to go first. Can you share an experience where someone acted in allyship in a way that was concretely helpful or meaningful for you? So if you could introduce yourself with a few more things that you want to say about yourself, and then share an example of allyship in your life.
I think I need to.
Is it on? Yeah, great. So, as Beth already said, I'm Casper. I'm transgender and bisexual. I have a background with a Baptist church originally, then the Salvation Army, and I'm now an Anglican, so I've had a really diverse experience in terms of denominations. That will come in a little bit later, I feel. I think for me, I'll give sort of two short examples of allyship. The first one is just one time, the former youth pastor of my parents' church reached out to me during a period of time where Beth had me doing a lot of these panels, and just asked me for my email address. And often when people do that, they want resources or they want to have a long-form conversation with me about why I think it's okay to live the way I do. And so I gave it to her expecting that to be the case, and then she just sent me an e-transfer. And in the memo said, I've seen what you've been doing recently and posting about on Facebook, and I know that it's hard work and that often people don't get paid for it. And it was not a lot of money, but the fact that she personally chose to do that and make that statement was really meaningful. And the other thing is just people correcting pronouns for me, or correcting my name for me. That's appropriate in my case because I'm out all the time, and everyone knows that I'm a man and that I use this name and that my pronouns are he, him. You will need to check in with people about how out they are if you're not sure before you acted as an ally in this way. But for me, it's been really meaningful because at this stage in my life, most of the time when I'm being misgendered, it's on purpose and someone's trying to make a statement. And I often don't have the capacity to correct those people myself. And being able to know that there are people in my life who will do that for me, especially in church settings, so that I don't have to defend myself, makes me feel a lot safer and a lot more comfortable. And also makes me feel empowered to be in those spaces without worrying that people will out me by being allowed to refer to me with she, her pronouns or my previous name in front of people who may not know that I'm transgender.
I'm Kathy. I identify loosely as queer, largely because it's a complex word and I like that. Go by feminine pronouns, she, her, hers. I'll just give something really simple. It was a few people from my church who, I go to Artisan Church. It's a Mennonite Brethren church, but very much on the outskirts of the conservative center of that denomination. And we're in a bit of a process ourselves. And at the time, it is no longer the case now, but at the time that queer folks, LGBTQ folks were not allowed to become members. I had some friends who also, who are straight and cis, who also chose not to become a member. I like to kind of couch that in just sort of this idea that I try to not kind of glorify acts like that or turn folks into heroes around things like that. I think really the thing that's meaningful to me is to do, kind of like what Beth was saying, to do just things and not just believe just things, and to not kind of pat yourself on the back for just not being a jerk. I think I'm going to take what you said to heart of not viewing kind of your sacrifices as somehow really glorified, but actually just view them as things that should be expected of yourself, that you should expect of yourself. In this desire to do justice, I think it's a very small, if a space at all, of neutrality. Either you're doing justice and activating justice, or you're activating injustice and allowing it to perpetuate. So, yeah. I need to say it again. Either you're doing justice and you're activating justice, or you're activating injustice by doing nothing and allowing it to perpetuate.
That was worth saying again. On to Sarah and Wendy. Question for you. What are some things that you've been learning as you have been stepping out and practicing allyship with LGBTQ folks?
Well, there's a lot of different ways I could answer that. I think one of the things that I have learned is exactly what Kathy was saying, that there's not really a neutral spot. And what's more is I feel learned, in particularly the last couple of years, that the mythical third way is just useless. Which sounds terrible to say out loud, I'm sorry. But I think that a lot of times people who are wanting to practice allyship or wanting to pursue a third way of being able to kind of hold the tension. And I think one of the things that I have been learning is that it's admirable, and it is often born out of a place of good intentions and tenderness for people and wanting to walk alongside of people, but you hit the limits pretty quick. And it's usually the people who are LGBTQ+ that are left on the other side of that limit. And so that's something that I feel like I've been learning. I think I thought for a really long time that there could be a third way. I hoped that there could be. But I think reality maybe is a bit different. I mean, there's a number of things, obviously, that you learn and are still growing on. And I think that everybody's heard enough from me tonight. Wendy, your turn.
The lesson I keep on learning, it has to do with how deeply entrenched straight and cis privilege is. Shrek said that being an ogre was like being an onion, and there's many layers. So I've been doing this work a long time, and I know that I'm not at the center of the onion yet. And it would be easy to feel humiliated about that. But in that act of taking on a feeling of humiliation, I am centering myself yet again. So I think I am learning that the human tendency to center ourselves is so pernicious that it takes profound discipline and practice to decenter yourself. And when it is pointed out to you that you are yet again centering yourself with the best of intention, to simply say thank you. I want to hear that. As difficult as it is, I want to embrace these learning moments, and it's not about me in this moment. It's not about whether I feel humiliated, or whether I feel guilty, or whether I feel like a loser because I messed up again. It is about saying thank you. boy, this runs deep. Let's keep learning.
That's my colleague, folks. Some good stuff. Casper and Kathy, you've already referenced that you've had different journeys with church and where you've ended up. What would you want to say to allies who have chosen to stay and remain in non-affirming churches? And what would you want to say to allies who find themselves in more affirming communities today? And if you want to address one or the other, you're welcome to, because I'm sure between the two of you, you'll cover it.
First, I just feel kind of compelled from that question to couch it in a bigger space, which is that no church should be about being affirming alone. I think that sort of defeats the purpose of the fact that it is a family of God, that we are trying to actually make space in a multitude of ways. I'll say that I've been grateful to be asked and been able to be a part of a number of LGBTQ panels to talk about my own experiences. The kinds of panels I've not been invited to is around the fact that I'm a person of color, and I have not seen other folks of color who have been able to share their really shitty experiences of being in white churches as a person of color. So I just want to kind of like place this in a larger conversation around the implications of affirming and non-affirming sexuality and all these other pieces. For allies in non-affirming spaces, or those who are practicing allyship, I'm grateful. Those are spaces that are often quite unsafe for LGBTQ folks, and so I very much view this whole journey of moving forward as needing the whole body. There are certain folks who will not hear what I have to say, and there are folks that will hear what you have to say, and you might say the exact same thing that I might say, but because of who you are able to reach folks that I could never reach, and that's really important work. For folks in affirming churches, I would say don't sit pretty. Always keep asking what it means to advocate for. What are you advocating for? And if you're advocating for something, then who are you advocating for? And if you don't know who you're advocating for, if you don't have genuine relationships, you don't actually know what you're advocating for either. Yeah, it's really important in any kind of work of advocacy or allyship to always know who it is actually that you're advocating for and you're allying for. It's really easy to kind of get entrenched in your own understandings of what's right and what's needed, and oftentimes it leads to harm, or can.
I think the biggest question that I tend to ask people who say that they're allies or say that they're affirming and they are really involved in their non-affirming churches is what kind of consequences are you facing there? If you're not facing any consequences, even just social consequences, you probably aren't practicing allyship. Because when I walk into a non-affirming church and talk about the way that I live my life or what I believe, I am met with a lot of animosity, and I often find that people who espouse an affirming belief point to me one-on-one, or to a group of people who have a similar mindset, are not comfortable enough to say that on a larger scale, and that just isn't allyship if it's a secret. And then I guess what I'd say to people at affirming churches is quite similar to what Kathy said. There are lots of people in the Anglican Church who have a lot of pride in their identity as Anglicans because we are more affirming than many denominations are. But I think that excuses the fact that there's work to do in the church at large, and that just because our denomination is affirming does not mean everybody can choose to be a part of it. Some people are not born into an affirming denomination, and it's quite difficult to leave a church that you know. And so even if your church is a comfortable place for queer people, how can you be doing the work to make sure that the whole church can be?
Wow, thank you. One more question for each person here. For Sarah and Wendy, what missteps have you made, getting real here, or observed, if you want to take a step aside, as straight and cisgender people attempt to practice allyship?
I'm going to take it personally and say mistakes. Wendy's like, here, Sarah. Hand the mic to that one. My mistakes have been legion. I mean, it is just remarkable how ignorant I have been. I think that some of the mistakes are exactly that. They're born out of ignorance often, more than ill intent or harm. I think that probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made was in being too cautious, I think, of trying to hold the line of keeping everybody happy. Peacekeeping is not the same thing as peacemaking, and I think that I confused one for the other. And so leaning further into the idea that peacemaking can be disruptive, it can be uncomfortable, it can make you uncomfortable, it can make the people whom you love uncomfortable. Learning to lean into that discomfort and not see it as a sign of you doing it wrong, necessarily. I think another thing that I got wrong repeatedly was being overly sensitive when I was being corrected. Instead of perceiving it as what critique actually is, which is a gift, an invitation to do better, to care for people better, to love them more. You know, there's a number of different things I think that I wish I had done differently, but those are two I think that are at the top of the list. You know, to begin to see critique or pushback as invitations and as gifts, and then also to I think to steward the fact that the world is set up to listen to women like me with intention, with humility, and always being someone who is willing to pass the mic. So.
For those of you who are involved in practicing allyship and have real tangible opportunity to do so, I think it is the reality to say it can be exhausting, emotionally exhausting, spiritually exhausting. And I think a mistake that I have made and I see others making is looking to LGBTQ2S plus people for validation or comfort and being unaware of the emotional labor that you are asking of queer people. The exhaustion of an ally pales to the exhaustion of dealing with microaggressions on an absolutely constant basis in largely straight, cis, white, etc. spaces. And so I think allies need to practice figuring out how to soothe ourselves when it gets dicey, and it will. When it hurts, because it will. When it's exhausting, because it will. How do we set up our own internal supports as well as external supports where we're not looking to queer people to make us feel better about our labor? It also includes just doing our own homework. It's beautiful to be invited into the sacred trust of a queer person's story. Don't ever underestimate how much energy that requires of someone. And so do your own darn homework. Be aware of what you are asking of people. And there can be a validation in the larger faith community about some of us who are stepping out in spaces and places that are still mired and bogged down. It is not always easy to discern how to navigate that wisely without letting it go to your head or without playing this weird martyr card. But quite honestly, we just got to figure it out, put our hand to the plow, and keep at the work.
Thank you. Casper and Kathy, I want to give the last word to you. This is a pretty wide open question of like a catch-all. What's your final word to these folks? Any advice, any thoughts for straight cisgender people in general who are trying to practice allyship? Take it away.
I think my number one is don't expect queer people to help you through your journey about this or to make you feel better about your mistakes. And absolutely, I do that with many people I love, and I do so with love in my heart and with willingness because I want to. But to expect that of someone is the opposite of allyship. So like Wendy was saying, build those supports to make sure that if you face consequences or if things are uncomfortable and you do make mistakes, there are people who can help you navigate that, who are not the people who you're trying to advocate for.
I think so this idea of everyone practicing allyship, I have privilege in very many categories, and so I'm in a weird place in the middle of recognizing how difficult and the responsibility of practicing allyship and taking responsibility for myself in that process, as well as kind of feeling the other side of what it feels like to have various intersectionalities involved in my experience day to day. And I like to keep all of those pieces kind of part of a bigger picture, which maybe is as you guys are starting to pick up on that. Yeah, the image that comes to mind is around the table. We all have been invited to have a seat at God's table, which means that you're not pulling up a seat for me, and I'm not pulling up a seat for you. I'm in micro ways, yeah, like your literal institutional building community, you may ask and advocate for a seat to be pulled up for queer folks. And in queer communities, you may be invited to have a seat as well. They're different because the privileges and the power dynamics are extremely different. But the bigger picture is that you don't get to pull up a seat for me, I have a seat. And so it's really important, I think it's just really important in any of these kinds of conversations around privilege and marginality that we recognize that we are all children and that we have been invited in the same way. And if we really do believe in the decentering and the first will be last and the low will be brought high, then all of our privileges actually are ways in which we are separated from God. And that we have this really amazing opportunity to look at our privilege and say, I have something to learn from someone who has less than I do from a societal aspect, but who deeply, profoundly has more in the eyes of God. And just this constant, like you were saying, this constant reminder and remind us over and over again this idea that God's inviting all of us and we don't invite, and also like decenter, like elevate, find where actually God is doing the work and where God can be found, and it's low and it's wide and out. Yeah.
Thank you. I just feel like really proud of myself for picking such good panelists. Can we give them actually a round of applause for their work? We need to wrap this up because some people got to drive back to Abbotsford tonight. But we don't want this to be the end. We want to have more events like this. I personally, as a Vancouverite, want to gather more folks like you and give you a chance to ask your questions. We didn't really get to that tonight. Give you a chance to say, hey, this is what's happening in my church, in my context. Does anyone have some wisdom from what happened with you? We want to be grouping you together, so please, if you didn't get a chance to leave your email in the offering plate, come visit our table with my wonderful staff over here who are so ready for you, and you can create some more generous space in your wallets. That was Becca's joke, that was good. And if you have any pennies in the air, you can let them drop over there. That was my joke. That was really right. And with that, I'm going to let the last word come from my staff colleague who does the most work with allies in our community. So Wendy, would you close us off?
One of the burning questions of the Church of Jesus Christ is, how do we grow disciples? I know of no better practice for the maturation of followers of Jesus than to take on the suffering and the exhaustion and the joy and the frustration and the humiliation and the blessing of practicing allyship. So if we want the Church of Jesus Christ to grow and to mature, then some of us got to shit or get off the pot. Because the opportunity is directly in front of us. Allow me to pray with you. Living Lord Jesus Christ, the one who showed us a willingness to practice allyship to the point of crucifixion, who then conquered the death of all the power structures that keep us separate by rising from the dead. May you, in your glorious living Spirit, give us all that is needed to follow in your footsteps, in deepening our capacity and enlarging our hearts to love our neighbor, to love the other so profoundly that to lose power is joy, and freedom, and life. Thank you that you go ahead of us and prepare the way, that you come alongside and are in us, and that you sweep up the mess that we make. We entrust those we seek to ally into your loving, tender, gracious care. And we pray with thanksgiving. Amen. Have a great evening, folks. Thank you so much for being with us.